Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to another Supatease video, and I had a ton of requests to construct this tier list. It's going to be a difficulty PvP tier list for Season 2 of Midnight, with the most challenging specializations being ranked at the top of the tier list, and the easiest specializations ranked at the bottom of this tier list. This type of tier list is great for making the distinction for how much time you have to play the game, how much time investment do you want, because the specializations at the bottom are likely going to deliver you results faster. So if you're just chasing a quick elite set or maybe the weapon illusion and you don't really care about the process of mastery, then you'll want to pick the specializations airing towards the bottom side. Or if you just want something just kind of casual, you only have a couple of hours to play and you want to get a decent feel out of the game, then the bottom half of this tier list is going to be a great pick for you. But if you do want the process of mastery, you like the challenge and discovering what you're capable of, then you'll want to pick a specialization from the middle up. So depending on what your personal preferences are, that's how I would use this tier list to guide your selection. But at the end of the day, you can always pick whatever you want, regardless of whatever is on the internet telling you that you should play. But let's get started here. We got the Affliction Warlock, and this one's immediately going up into the hardest tier. Affliction Warlock has to hardcast a lot more than any of the other spellcasters in the game, which means you will be interacting with pretty much every interrupt at all times, and if you are unable to deal with them, you'll have a very frustrating experience. Its mobility is a bit more nuanced than other classes. You're not just going to kind of bounce around on it and bonk people and get easy wins. You will have to learn how to portal, what timings to portal, where to put your portal, how to use your gateway, what specific mechanics you need to use the gateway to escape from. Its defensive cooldowns are not entirely that powerful. You may often at times die through defensive cooldowns with mismanagements of your positioning, so you do get punished very heavily. However, if you do master all of these elements, you can absolutely conquer the battlefield, which is why in my mind it goes up to the hardest level of difficulty. It also has spammable crowd control, which means you're monitoring diminishing returns. It has a decently low cooldown interrupt, which means you will have to be monitoring enemy casts quite frequently. So it is a very challenging specialization. However, once you've led it to mastery, you will see how much you're able to flourish on it. Arcane Mage, another one going straight up into the hardest tier list here. Arcane Mage, much like Affliction, has to hardcast quite a lot. Its defensive capability, it has a lot of tools, but they are a little bit more challenging to figure out when to time, alter time, knowing when to rewind it, knowing when there's purges available to avoid them. Your barriers are the same thing. And then obviously your cooldowns, like to be able to get your cooldowns off, you have to pretty much hardcast them in a lot of circumstances, especially with the new Arcane Missile build and with the new Apex talent. So it's just a lot of hardcasting, and you are a bit squishier, so you're going to be more stationary, so it's easier to punish you. And you do have the spammable crowd control element that makes it a lot more difficult, which is why it's deserving of this kind of hardest tier position. Arms Warrior, decent level of difficulty. This is one that I'm going to try and talk through a little bit before I kind of toss it up here, because I'm debating between medium or hard as far as difficulty for this one. You do have a pretty easy rotation, just maintaining Ren, Mortal Strike, building up your stacks of Overpower, and using Execute procs when you get them. You do have things like Spell Reflect, which can be a bit of a skill cap as far as when to avoid crowd control, and using Blade Storm to avoid crowd control, whereas using it to do damage. I'm kind of leaning more so into the medium tier at the moment, mostly because of its power. It's very strong at the moment in terms of damage, but at the same time, it can be hard because it's easy to kite and you can be squishy. So its damage component, I would say, is a medium level of difficulty, but its mobility, how you handle your mobility, and its defense, I think, do actually make it harder. So I'm going to put it maybe a bit, that's the main reason I'm putting it here onto the hard tier as opposed to the medium tier. Assassination Rogue, pretty much most specializations for Rogue are going to be very hard. I think it's probably the easiest of all the Rogues, though, so I'm going to go a little bit lighter than the hardest level of difficulty. Having to just monitor your position, pre-feint stuns, maintain your bleeds, deciding when to allocate your smoke bomb and your death mark, and seeing those lines of victory, because those are often the main way that you win games. And if you are unable to see those lines, it will be more challenging as opposed to other specs, which can kind of just bounce around and hit things a little bit more than others. It is very strong at the moment, so it might feel easy just because it's strong. However, it is getting nerfed, so I do think it might move around a bit. At most, I'm thinking like Arms and Asa could be between medium and hard. Maybe I need to make a tier list with even more positions here. I could definitely see them existing in a space in between. Augmentation Evoker, I actually do think is hard. I think maintaining Ebonmite and timing it with your deep breaths and timing it with your big burst windows, and you have to deal with a lot of interrupts, much like the casters up here, actually does make it quite challenging. I think it's one of the reasons why it's not as popular, is that it's actually harder, and it's tough to get performance out of it for that same reason. We're going to leave the tanks for now, because I think almost all of them are just very easy, but we'll leave them for now. I just want to talk about the DPS specs. This one's an obvious one. BM Hunter is just the easiest. It just has hardly less than 3 abilities rotationally. Its cooldowns are always available. You can borderline not land any crowd control and still be able to win games with monstrously powerful sustained damage. And even if you can't land a trap, you can just use Scattershot now to kind of mow people down with tons of pressure. Really, the only difficult thing is knowing when to use Master's Call to get your pet out of a route when you're trying to do a lot of damage. And other than that, you're just spamming whatever button lights up on your screen. So it's a really good one to go for. Feral Druid, immediately going up onto the hardest tier. The main reason for this is that you have to manage combo points. You have to manage preemptively shape-shifting depending on the situation to survive. So your main defensive cooldown requires preemptive usage, so you have to understand and anticipate stuns. You have spammable crowd control with 2 different diminishing returns to track in order to maximize those things. Deciding whether you should use control, damage, or defense at any given moment is much more extreme than any other specialization. And you have the snapshotting mechanic with Tiger's Fury to try and maintain your maximum bleed stacks. And you can off heal and support others. Honestly, I probably should have made an entirely different tier for Feral Druid, just because it is so difficult. Balanced Druid, I'm going to put onto the medium level of difficulty. Could see it between medium and easy. I think its defense against survivability makes it a bit more challenging. Its damage is probably the easiest of almost any class. Just instant Moonfire, instant Sunfire, use Eclipse or Incarn and spam Star Surge, and you're ready to go. You're basically doing your maximum potential of damage. But defense, as far as knowing when to kite, when to go into bear form, how to get through interrupts to Cyclone, I do think that does make it challenging. Another reason it's a bit easier is because Solar Beam's a minute cooldown, so you don't really have an interrupt, so you don't really pay as much attention to cast bars, which requires a little bit less attention to detail. So I do think that drags its difficulty down a bit. So I'm going to go medium here for Balanced Druid. Devourer, Demon Hunter, I think I'm going to go into easy, but it could see it on easiest. The main reason for this is just you don't really have a lot of anything. You just have your damage rotation. So once you've mastered its kind of burst rotation, especially if you're playing like the Hunt, knowing when to weave in your Void Blades between your Hunt to be able to maximize your big hits. Once you've learned that kind of burst window, that's like pretty much all there is to it, other than just blinking around the map a lot. So it's very straightforward, not a lot of nuance as far as control, which obviously leaves a lot of control off the table for you in the match as well for the end of the game. It's pretty much all you have. I think it is going to be a bit more challenging to play also on Tuesday as far as its viability, but as far as rotations go, it's definitely mechanically a lesser demanding specialization. Demonology, you do have to hardcast quite a bit, but you have multiple schools of magic unlike Affliction, which I do think it makes it easier to play. You have a lot of instant crowd control as well to peel attackers, but the mobility element of Warlock is still there. You are tankier though, which I do think makes it a bit easier. So I think I am going to be dropping this. Like, I actually kind of want to put it here. I'm not going to lie. I feel like the rotation is not that complex. Shadow Bolt, instant Demon Bolt, procs, and Hand to Gul'dan, and then you summon your time. It's not like the rotation element is not that hard. You do cast quite a bit. I think that maybe the mobility element makes it a bit harder to play, but I could definitely see it here. Again, between medium and between medium hard, and maybe we'll move it as we go through the list here. I'll leave it on hard for now, just because I do think Warlock specs generally are a bit more challenging, maintaining Curse of Tongues or Exhaustion and Weakness, as well as maintaining your rotation. It does add a little bit of a level of difficulty that Balanced Druid doesn't have. Destruction Warlock, I think this is another one that's kind of on the easy tier list here, probably the easiest of the Warlock specs. 3 schools of magic, so it's very easy to deal with interrupts, unlike the others. You do have the mobility element of it. It's mostly just a tuning thing as to whether or not it's challenging. Like if it's super squishy and you just die, it'll feel very hard. But the mechanics of the class are generally not that challenging. I think it's the easiest to deal with getting attacked relative to the other specs with instant incinerate damage that you have available to you as well. So I think a medium level of difficulty is probably fair for it. Still has spammable crowd control though, so you have to mount it or DR. Still has a very low cooldown interrupt as well. So I don't think it's fair to put it to the bottom half of the tier list. But I could see it kind of scoping between this medium to hard level of difficulty. Devastation Evoker, I think, is also on the easiest tier list. It's just straightforward disintegrate, flying around with hover. A little bit more nuance to it with the new ability after you use Dragon Rage that converts into this like on-use attack that gives you Essence Break. There was a little bit of nuance there that from the last time that I played it, but even that, not really too challenging. Sleepwalk is a spammable crowd control, but it feels more forgiving because you can kind of just spam it out there and it gets interrupted. You just go straight back to spamming Disintegrate. A lot of other classes get hindered a lot more if they're interrupted on their spammable crowd control, unlike you. And you also have Obsidian Scale immunity to interrupts, so you can just kind of ignore a lot of the mechanics that these guys have to deal with, which makes it a lot easier for you. And when it comes to melee, it's one of the easiest casters to deal with them because they just can't catch up to you. You're just constantly flying away. So definitely on the easier part of the spectrum here. Discipline Priest I actually think is very hard, but do I think it's the hardest? I kind of think it is. Is this maybe not? Maybe we'll go hard for now. But I could see it being the hardest healer. Just has a lot of juggling. You're always doing something, high actions per minute. But even still with that difficulty, it's one of the most popular healers. Usually, you know, something on the higher end of difficulty is not as popular. Maybe it's because its damage was so high. We'll see if its popularity maintains with its damage being put more in check now with this season. However, it is getting some buffs to its direct healing, which is nice. That's something that it struggles with. It's not a healer that, like, if you're not keeping up with his actions per minute, like, you fall behind, and you're probably not coming back in the game. And I think that's what makes it challenging relative to a lot of other healers. Elemental Shaman, another one that I think is kind of more like a medium level difficulty. Maybe it's like the hardest of this tier, closer. Maybe Destro is actually the hardest. We'll go, you know, left to right, top to bottom as far as like difficulty of play of these specializations. I think the low cooldown wind shear, monitoring interrupts, and using Thunderstorm Static Field Totem to reposition enemies does require a little bit more attention. But again, just Flame Shock Lava Burst, Instant Ascendant, Nature Swiftness Lava Burst. There's a lot of instants, and you have a lot of schools of magic, which makes it a bit more forgiving. Can be a squishy in some situations, especially if you don't know how to kite with it, which makes it a bit harder. But I think it's on the easier end of a lot of the casters, but not totally down here. Enhancement Shaman, another one I think is easier than it has been historically, especially if you're playing the one button build with Stormstrike, with Stormbringer. So I think medium level difficulty, again, for the DPS Shaman specs is fair, just because grounding and wind shear do require a lot of attention to detail. You can absolutely carry situations, and if you don't have that awareness built up and that skill developed, then you'll miss those opportunities. But rotationally, you know, Totemic might be a bit more complicated, but Stormbringer, I would almost say, is almost on the easy tier for Enhanced. It's kind of just pop a sentence and you're just flying through and you're doing a bunch of damage. Frost DK, I think, is on the easy tier. It's just Grip, Blind, Dragon Stun, Pop Cooldowns, one shot, and repeat that over and over and over. There's not really a lot else going on with it. Maintaining Chains of Ice and running away would be the other element of it, but I do think it is a very easy specialization. Fire Mage, again, Mage spec in general is pretty challenging, but I think Fire is probably one of the easier ones. Especially with how strong it is at the moment. It just does so much damage. The barriers are not too complicated to use. I think the multiple schools of magic make it a lot easier as well. I kind of want to put it, like, I feel like at most I could put it on the medium tier, but I kind of want to put it on easy almost, just because of how powerful it is. But I think with its kit right now, it's pretty easy to pull off. All instant damage with Combust. That's another main benefit. So really good. Frost Mage, I think, is probably a little bit more challenging than Fire. So I'll put it here in between Arcane. And in between Fire and Arcane, mostly just because you do have to hardcast Ray of Frost, so it's a little bit more hardcast dependent, a little bit more stationary, which I think makes it more challenging. Trade-off there is that you get a more powerful slows, which can make kiting a bit easier on Frost relative to Fire. But I think the combustion burst instant, you know, most of these classes here are just very easy instant burst, except Destro. But Destro has multiple schools of magic, which makes it a bit easier, more straightforward. Just maintain Immolate, Conflagrate, Chaos Bolt, or Soulfire. I think somewhere in here it's probably fair with Mage. Arcane hardest, Frost second, and Fire is easiest. I think this has kind of been the condition that they've been in for multiple expansions, honestly. Fury Warrior, I think, is on the easier side of things. And how easy, again, they're very close. This is why I think Warrior should be on medium. But I think the kiting element of Warrior can make it challenging. I think I'm dragging Warrior down to medium. And they're both relatively close to the same level of difficulty as far as it's, again, defense and kiting is the main thing that make them challenging, that I wouldn't put them down here. Maybe defense honestly makes Frost like a medium spec too, though. I could see some fair arguments for that, but I think medium for now is the appropriate position for this. Havoc Demon Hunter I would actually place into the hard tier. Main reason for this is that you pretty much only do damage in your Eldrazi Reaver window. If you don't know how to set up that window, you're not going to be doing enough damage to win the game. So it's very dependent on that, whereas a lot of these other classes that are towards the bottom, you just send your cooldowns and attack, and it's ready to go. But Draki Reaver has a little bit more nuance to it and setup to it that you need to understand. And also has the backflipping immunity just to crowd control and repositioning there. You can get CC'd a lot as a Demon Hunter if you're not good at avoiding it. And it has the tools to actually avoid it. Holy Priest, easiest healer, not just because it's really strong right now, but just because its kit is really straightforward. It's all instant cast, immediate healing, a lot of immunities to both interrupts through the Sanctify or Mastery PvP talent and the Angel immunity. So it's really good for a beginner to jump on, just get direct healing and avoid a lot of annoying mechanics that other healers have to deal with. Holy Paladin, I think, is also on the easier side of things. I think it's just the same reason as a lot of immunities, can immune interrupts, can immune crowd control, immune a bunch of different effects, really strong direct healing. If you just mess up for a while, lay on hands, you're back in the fight. So just that immediate instant recovery and immunity to mechanics, I think makes it a lot less demanding than other healers. And it's kind of just more straightforward, just holy shock, instant heals. That makes it a bit easier to understand. Marksmanship Hunter, maybe I'm doing you guys dirty, but like, I feel like it's easy, bro. You just drop down volley, rapid fire, big damage. True shot, volley, rapid fire, big damage. Maybe it's a bit harder because you have to deal with disarms, and you're more stationary and you can get frustrated by stun locks. Like, that's the only thing really. Like, I think the best I could do is put you like here maybe with Devourer on easy, but like I really want to put it on easiest. It's just very straightforward, not a lot of keybinds. The only thing really difficult relative to BM is that you do have to deal with disarms, and how are you going to outplay the disarms? You have to think about that consciously, and I think that extra layer can make it more challenging than Beast Mastery, so we'll leave it on easy for now. Mistweaver I actually think is pretty challenging, especially depending on the build. If you're playing like a Fistweaver or a hybrid build where you have to decide when to go in and when to go out, and we're positioning around your port to avoid crowd control, maintaining a heal over time effects, you do have to expose your spell school to interrupts a lot more than other healers. I legitimately think Mistweaver is actually a pretty challenging healer to play at the moment, so I'm going to put it up onto the hard tier currently here for season 2. Outlaw Rogue, another one that's going to go immediately up onto the hardest one, mostly just because of how much tracking you have to do of buffs and what you rolled on Roll the Bones, and what cooldowns are available, and when should you prep, and did you get a proc that reset this ability, and should you use that. It's a lot of actions per minute, a lot of tracking, and it doesn't give you a lot of results for how much effort you're putting in to get that tracking. So I think it's fair, although I would say Feral's harder. That's why I say like left to right, top to bottom, as far as difficulty for these specializations. Preservation Evoker, I think, is actually pretty challenging too. Again, it depends on the throughput. Like, so if it has ridiculous throughput, it can feel easy. Any of these specs with ridiculous throughput can feel easy regardless of the rotation. But I think it is more nuanced. I think the echo mechanic, maintaining like what do you want to echo, your dream breath, your reversion, what are you going to echo, that type of mechanics makes it a bit more challenging. When you're going to verdant embrace, is it to avoid crowd control, is it to buff your healing? You do have spammable crowd control, you do have to worry about being a target for rogues and things like that. So I do think Preservation Evoker is on the harder side of things, so I'm going to put it on hard. I'm still kind of reserving the hardest. I think you guys can probably guess what healer's going up there right now, but I do think Preservation Evoker is actually decently challenging. We are kind of skipping the tanks until the end. I think most of them are very easy, but Resto Druid, there we go, we got it. I think this guy's at the top of the difficulty here because you have so much that you can do. The ceiling of it is massive, and even the floor is hard to maintain with Soul of the Forest, and where do you allocate your heal over time effects, because you make the wrong commitment, then you might just lose the game. However, some things that do make it easy is you can play like 80 yards away from the game sometimes. If you did have to engage with Cyclones and engage with Cat Form and things like that to win, then it would be very difficult. But I've seen some druids who just completely AFK 80 yards away, so it really depends on the meta. But I think mechanically, because of the potential available to it and the difficulty for new players to know how to allocate their hots, that it is the most challenging healer. But it really just depends on the meta, because there have been some situations where any of these healers randomly, depending on the tuning, can be like that, where they stand 80 yards away because they know they can't run out of mana, and they just avoid basically all the mechanics of the match. Then those healers become very easy in those situations. And honestly, Druid might end up being like that with the buffs, but for now I'll leave it on the hardest. Ret Paladin, going down straight to the easiest tier. You've got a lot of immunities, freedoms, range damage, very easy to access your rotation. The only real utility is kind of throwing out a sacrifice or throwing out an off heal every once in a while, and I feel like it doesn't make it too challenging. I think that it's pretty straightforward, mostly instant CC to lob onto the healer. I find it to able to deliver results very quickly with minimal effort. So I'm putting it up onto the easiest tier. Restoration Shaman. Hey, maybe Druid's got some competition here. Restoration Shaman can be difficult because you have to hard cast quite frequently. Although you do have very fast casts when you do it. Maybe it makes it a little harder or a little easier, but the wind shears and grounding totems as well can make it challenging. I could see it being like second most challenging or close to it with disc, like druid and shaman and disc and prez. Like all the healers, surprisingly, except these two are I would say very decently challenging. Shadow priest I do think is pretty hard right now. I'm going to put it up here. Mostly just having to deal with interrupts and spam dispel on your dots can be difficult. Doesn't have like a lot of lockdown to be able to like prevent people from attacking you. You do get attacked every game. You do have to deal with interrupts constantly because of that. But you are decently tanky, which I think limits it from being on the hardest tier, and like the lack of just significant utility as well. That missing layer of complexity I think doesn't make it the most challenging. But I do find it to be more stressful, especially when you're getting attacked. Subtlety rogue I actually don't think is that hard. Do I actually think subtlety is easier than assassination? I legitimately might be making the case for subtlety rogue going on medium. I think I am. I almost want to say it's easy, honestly, with the new just dance cheap shot send your burst with 2-button rotation. I guess the Gormaz bite adds a little bit of complexity to it that maybe pulls it up from easy to medium, and the monitoring of diminishing returns relative to a lot of other classes is something to consider. So that is holding it up here towards the medium, but I actually think it's probably easier than assassination. It doesn't have to deal with snapshotting. It doesn't have to deal with running out of steam like assassination can with vanish charges. I think medium is probably fair for it. Survival I think is more challenging than the other hunter specs. Tracker's net and the bleed removal with mending bandage add some extra layers, which is actually pretty important right now with rogue, and probably feral druid viability moving into the next reset. So I actually do think survival is decently hard. I'm going to put this up here onto the hard tier with Demon Hunter and Assassination. Its burst is getting nerfed. It might even feel even harder depending on, because the compensation they're giving to Raptor Strike is really nothing. Raptor Strike and Raptor Sweep are like less than 4% of my overall damage, and they're getting buffed by 20%, so it's like 1% more damage, and they're neutering all of the burst, which is like 40% of your damage. So like gaining 2% for minus 20% is not going to be an equivalent trade there. So I do think like it'll feel difficult just mechanically based on its tuning, and it will also based on its utility and its kit. Unholy DK, I do think this one's a bit more challenging, knowing when to use your putrefies, how to line up your cooldowns, death grip and chains of ice. I think it's definitely more complicated than than frost. Where do we want to put this? Also the pet kick, the pet management, I think that is an extra layer of difficulty that a lot of these other classes towards the bottom might not have to deal with. I kind of honestly want to put it like up here in like the hard tier, especially also with its viability. I think with a lot of the healers right now that are strong, that kind of just deal with your diseases by spam dispelling them and stuff like that, it can be very annoying, which makes it hard. So the tuning makes it hard. I think the kit makes it a bit more challenging. Knowing how to monitor your runic power for defense and offense makes it challenging, but it doesn't have the same level of nuance I think as this upper tier, but I do think it is on the harder side of things. We're almost there. Windwalker Monk. This is a tough one, whether I want to put on medium or I want to put on hard. I think medium is a more fair position for it now, although the hit combo I think does add more nuance, because no other class has that, where you just try not to repeat the same ability twice. If you're not comfortable with that, it can be a bit foreign relative to a lot of other specializations, but its power is so strong that I think it just kind of brute forces people down. It doesn't have a huge amount of keybind density. I think honestly I want to put this on medium. I don't actually think it's that hard. I don't know. I feel like maybe I could put it like somewhere here, like the bottom of the hard tier, but I again, somewhere between medium and hard. I should maybe have added another tier to put some of these specializations in, because it's actually been a tough distinction between putting them on hard or medium. I think the main reason for this is you have to pay attention to your portal positioning, because that's your main defense, and that's a lot more challenging to me than a lot of the other defensive mechanics available to the melee DPS. That's the main distinction that's putting it up here. And then the tanks, man, like they're all easy, bro. Like I guess Guardian has to deal with like some crowd control and stuff like that, so like slightly slightly harder to do. Like these guys might be harder because they have a little more crowd control and a little more support and off healing, whereas these guys are more straightforward and just attack. That's like the only distinction that I can make. But the tanks in general are very easy. They have high survivability. They just don't die. You get away with a lot of mistakes. So yeah, that's my general consensus with it. I could see some wiggling between the medium and the hard tier for some of these specializations, but I think the hardest and the easiest are probably most reasonably dialed in here for this tier list. So I hope you guys enjoyed this discussion, this breakdown. It helps you with making a selection for your specialization and what your goals are and what your aims are for the season to achieve those goals, because that is the main objective of this channel, is to help you out on your pursuits. So thank you guys very much for the support as always. If you enjoyed the video, hit the subscribe button, and I will see you in the next one.